Hey everybody, on today's The Everyday Makers, we're going to turn some dimensional pine lumber of a couple different sizes into this custom made wooden crate. Let's do it. Okay, for today's project, we're going to start off. I have a 1x12, so 1x11.5 board, or 3/4 by 11.5 actually. We're going to measure it out for the bottom and for the ends. So first I got 14.5 inches. That's my bottom dimension. 14.5 plus 3/4 plus 3/4 is 16. So that gives me a total length of 16 inches. So I'm going to measure that, strike a solid line, get it ready to go. And like I said, this is going to be the bottom plate. It's a solid bottom. Then I move on to my second dimension. This will be my ends. Once again, same board, so it's the exact same width to start off with. I just have to come up with the height of each piece. So these are going to be 5.5 inches. 5.5 inches is a relatively arbitrary number. It's just something that seemed to work out really good for the overall look I was going for. The proportion looked good to me. And it gives you a nice spot for a nice open handle. Gives you some grab on, but it actually doesn't just eat up the whole side of the handle. Now we're going to move on to cutting. Just standard cuts on a miter saw. This whole project, skill-wise, is very easy. There's not a lot to it. I like to do miter saw cuts, especially for stuff like this, in 2 or 3 passes, going a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper each time. I find that tends to work really, really well to prevent the blade from burning in. Right here, chopping off the end, just give me a fresh end. The end that was from the factory was kind of a mediocre end, had a little bit of a funky knot on the corner. So I'm cutting a 5.5 inch chunk for the end and a 5.5 inch chunk to match it. So that'll give me both my 5.5s and a 14.5. So the entire box will be 16 long. Now I'm going to cut my side rails. There will be 6 of these total. I'm going to double check my measurements just to make sure I have what I think I have. So that's a 14.5 inch bottom slab plus the thickness 3/4 inch plus 3/4 inch on my end pieces. Gets me 16. From here, I'm going to cut 6 16-inch pieces. And this is 1x2 lumber, which is 3/4 by 1.5. Pretty good size for the side rails. Then I'm just going to use my first piece to measure out all the subsequent pieces. You always want to use your first piece over and over so that you don't get different dimensions for the subsequent ones. It gives you a consistent measurement. And my 6-inch measurement just went a little bit over what I had on that stick, so I had one left over from another project I did just a couple days ago. So I was able to get 6 matching sticks, 16-inch apiece. Now we're going to routing. I recently made for another one of these a nice little jig to cut out a handle. This is just a rectangle cut out, nothing super fancy, anything like that, just looks nice, good size for a rectangle. I think it was 5 inches across by about 1.5 inches open or tall. So it gives you a good spot you can put your hand in. And this jig lines it up about 1 inch from the top, so you got about 1 inch worth of wood to grab onto. and then gives you pretty consistent alignment and just keeps it nice and square, because routers are something that can very, very easily get out of hand if you're not using anything to square them up with. They're not a real free-form kind of tool. And with routers, I'm not a router professional by any stretch of the imagination, but you basically just kind of have to work down for something like this. You just go little by little. For something like an end piece where you're just adding a round over or something like that, you can kind of tear through it. This, I went probably a quarter inch at a time, just nibbling out a little bit of this rectangle, a little bit of the rectangle, until I finally got all the way through the rectangle. Took 3 passes for each one, but well worth the time instead of just burning up the wood and fighting with it. And this router is definitely not a high quality router, so it doesn't do me any favors there. And I'm using a straight cutting bit on it just to kind of give me some straight lines and work my way through till I can pop out that handle. And there it is. Nice, smooth rectangle handle. Very classic style, doesn't require any extra hardware, just looks nice. I gotta release this piece from my jig and do the second one. The second one I line up, I've drawn a cross on each one to show me where exactly the center of my handle is going to be. And I've got the jig designed so that I can line up those center points and make everything consistent. We might do a video on making simple jigs another time. So this is going to be exactly like the first one. And with the help of some movie magic, it's all done. Now I'll clear out some of my shavings, give myself a little bit more of a clean surface. And there's 2 pieces of handles. Okay, now we're going to change out the bit. We're using a straight cutting bit, I think it's a 1/4 inch straight cutting bit. Seemed to go pretty well for the size of the piece I was working on. If you want to learn how to make a wrench disappear, magic. Okay, back swapping out the bits. We're going from a 1/4 inch straight cutting bit over to, I think it's a 1/2 inch round over bit. And this will basically just ease the inside of the handles, get rid of my sharp corners for me. Makes it a little more comfortable to hold. So using the exact same jig, we're going to do the exact same thing. Just working it around the sides. And I'm doing it on the insides and outsides, so 4 total runs of this to get the inside of the handle and the outside of the handle on both sides cleaned up. From here, we're on to everybody's favorite, sanding. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but basically every surface gets sanded. I like to break all the corners so that there's nothing sharp. Every piece gets the same treatment. And I like to do the face of these. The faces, when you're staining, make a little bit more of a difference. A lot of times pine can come with a little bit of a coating, a little bit extra sap on top that you want to get the stain through. And if there's sap on it or coating, it won't stain. So you want to sand that off. So now we're on to sanding. Sanding is something also I'm by no means a professional at, but I'm pretty happy with the results I get. I just put it on. It's not super rocket science to get okay results for, especially if you're the one doing the from start staining. Matching stain, I can't imagine, but doing a stain from start, it's pretty easy. So just kind of slather it on. Do your best to go at different angles to get it between the grain. So rather than going just for with or just against, kind of move it around, get it smudged around quite a bit. Then once I've got it covered, I like to go through and just do a straight pass. Gets rid of any bubbles, any real bad high spots. I go with the grain on the last pass. Right here, just clean it up. And when that dries, I find it gets it pretty darn consistent. And at the very least, if you've got some high spots, they blend in with the grain. So we'll let that soak in for a little bit while we do all the other pieces the exact same way. And stain doesn't take super long to set. So I know the longer you let it set, the more deep, richer colors it gets. But for this, I'm not looking to go with something dark like a cherry or something like that, or walnut. This is just an easy wood coat, bring out the grain a little bit. So do all my 6 slats for the sides, get them resting. And by the time all that's done, I'm pretty much ready to wipe off the top. This gets me the color I'm kind of looking for. So once I'm done staining the last piece, then I kind of move on and start wiping it down. So now we've done all those pieces, front and back, and the ends. And keep in mind, end grain is like a sponge. It will turn out black just about immediately. So there's nothing you can necessarily do that I know of to thin it out and make it more consistent with your colors. End grain is just end grain. So we're all stained, ready to go. Now we're going to do a little trick here that I'd known of, but I just saw somebody else do recently again, and it brought it to mind. A little customization using your printer. We might do a separate video on this one too, but it basically lets you add in a little nice logo or a name, something like that, using your printer. Turns out about like this. Nice clear custom logo on it. Our logo is a little tricky because I didn't think about the fact that it's got a lot of brown in it. And brown doesn't show up on brown wood very well. So if I did it again, I'd probably do it in all black. But it looks really nice. It's simple, makes something look super duper custom. Now we're to glue up. Glue up is glue up is glue up. Don't put a whole ton of glue on it because you don't want a ton of squeeze out, but you do want to get good coverage. And then I'm using 1.5 inch brads. Just simple. This really is not a building a house kind of job. So brads are plenty. Brads and glue, everything in the world you're going to need. So I've got about 4 brads in the bottom of each side, plus a strip of glue. Once that glue dries, that sucker's not going anywhere. Clean up a little of my squeeze out. And now put the side rails on. The side rails, put a little stripe of glue on the ends, line it up, and I shoot 1 brad. And it's important that I shoot 1 brad. You want to go pretty minimal for something we're going to do in a little bit. So 1 brad's plenty to hold it, and like I said, the glue's going to be the actual heavy lifting part of the deal. But the brad's perfect to hold it in place. It's almost like a clamp. And I've been using this 1/4 inch plywood. It was basically just cut-offs from another project. Using that as a spacer between each of the rails to give me consistency. I like the top rail lined up with the top lip of everything. And the bottom rail I actually prefer up a little bit from the bottom, so it gives it almost an overall rounded bottom look to it. And the 1/4 inch spacers worked out perfect for that. I've got probably an 1/8 inch maybe between the bottom rail and the bottom itself. So it gives it a good look. Once we have all 6 connected, we do a little bit of a different operation here. I'm adding in some decorative screws. These are semi-structural, but more so decorative. I opted to go with these glossy black drywall screws. They look really, really good, and like I said, they're meant more just for the look than really for the structure. The glue will do all the heavy lifting. But since I'm putting them in anyway, I use 2.5-inch screws, and I'm going to use this countersink bit to drive them in. So I'll go through and I'll drill out all 6 of them on each side, countersink those in just a little bit. And this pre-drilling will keep it from splitting anything, because a 2.5-inch screw going into 3/4 material, that's putting a lot of stress on it. So now I'll go through, screw these screws in, so the heads are pretty much even. I want them as flush as possible with the rail itself. I don't want them just jammed in there, and I don't want them to stick out. Just ideally, flush is perfect. Drill in my other 6. Put in 6 more screws. And with the couple of brads, the glue, and the 2.5-inch screws, the sucker is rock solid. Go through, clean up a little bit of squeeze out that I got after putting the screws in. I didn't go super thick on the glue because I really didn't want a ton of squeeze out, and for what it's doing, it's tons of glue. Now we're going to go through and spray on some lacquer. For this particular, I've been using satin lacquer. Just clear satin lacquer spray can. Works great. Just coat it pretty good. Based on how lacquer in a spray can works, you can be pretty liberal with it from the start. It'll soak it right up. The satin finish actually looks specifically good for that, because you really don't get runs per se. Don't obviously just sit in one place and hose it down, but as long as you keep your can moving, it really does look pretty consistently good. And let it dry. Well, after a relatively simple project, not a lot to it, I think it looks pretty good. Nice decorative crate, store stuff in it, give it as a gift. It's a pretty cool item. Pretty cheap to build, pretty easy to build. Anybody can do it. So thanks for joining us today. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and reshare. Reshares are a really, really big deal for us. The more you can show people stuff you like, stuff they might like, we'd appreciate it. And also don't forget, if you have interest in making a video for the Everyday Makers, we have ways to do that. You can send us your footage, we'll produce it, we can partner together on it. So let us know, just get a hold of us. Thanks, everybody.